appreciate a mild gesture. That was good. I like that. Thank you for that. We got some energy in the room. It's Friday. It's the first ever one of whatever this is. And there's people here, and hopefully you can hear us. Can you guys hear us okay? Hopefully you can hear us. Let us know if there's any problems with the audio. We had a few technical hiccups, but we made it. Yeah, first ever Inspire Reflection show. So thanks for coming, everybody. So who we got on
Thank you for having us.
Wow.
Yeah, for sure.
Wait until the end of it to see how you feel about it before you
Yeah, right. Yeah. We'll let you know.
It sounds good so far. Fantastic. All right, let's go with David. You want to give us an introduction? Let us know who you are and a bit about your channel.
Sure. Yeah, my name's David. I run the Sound Epistemology YouTube channel. It's epistemology. It's basically street epistemology from the Puget Sound area, which is that body of water near Seattle. It's also a Twitter handle, and I also run a Sound Epistemology Facebook group.
Awesome. And we were talking recently about the amount of gratuitous drone footage you've been including in the beginning of your SE videos to really zhuzh it up. I think it's fantastic. I would say it might be uncharitable to say, but it's almost worth watching for that alone. There's some fantastic SV video, but the drone footage is just the cherry on a very nice cake. It's very good.
Yeah, that's good to hear. Of course, the good SE and good conversation is paramount. But I also am focusing on giving more of a visual appeal.
Yeah.
So I appreciate that.
I just try to do that with raw sexual magnetism. I'm not sure how well that's coming across, but that's the only move I got. I don't have a drone, so that's what I'm going with. Sushi. We also have sushi.
It's working.
It's working for you, David. That's all I care about. Sushi. How are you, sir? Do you want to give us an introduction?
I am doing wonderful. I am Sushi. I am a very active user in the Street Epistemology Discord server, and I also host on Saturdays for the SE practice event, and I thoroughly enjoy doing SE. I think it's a very fun method of talking to people rather than just arguing and yelling at each other. It's a much more civil conversation. It seems it's more peaceful and tied towards critical thinking, so I enjoy it. But I'm from Pennsylvania, and I'm a adventurer, as we call it.
Street epistemologist / adventurer. That's a CV right there. I mean, you don't. What else do you need? Fantastic. Just to let everybody know, Sushi's got a fancy camera, and he's got about 12 millimeters of focal depth, right? So as he moves around, you'll notice he's just easing in and out of focus. So I would genuinely like to ask chat if they would kindly just berate him every time he moves out of his small window of focus. Hi, Sushi.
Do not adjust your TV sets.
Do not adjust your TV sets, indeed. And also today we've got Noah. Noah, would you care to introduce yourself?
Yeah, sure. So my name is Noah. I live in Florida, and I split my time between Florida and St. Louis, Missouri for work. I don't have a whole lot of roots in street epistemology, the community, but I recently found it, and I'm really optimistic about its power. For its power for producing better beliefs for the general the masses, and I think and myself especially. I'm glad to be in a place where I have good people that can try to help me unpack why I believe what I believe. I don't have any content, so to speak, of, but I do think that when it comes to street epistemology, I'm just very optimistic, and I'm looking forward to having engaging conversations with people. So
yeah, that's awesome, man. So you might not have content, but in some ways you were content, because I've recently published a video which is our interview together.
Do you have yourself? That's a good identity question.
Do you have yourself? Wow.
Yeah.
I don't think you own the copyright to your own content. Like you don't technically own the copyright to your own DNA. Apparently, there was some legal case that proved that. So you can't. So I don't know that you could claim your own content as your content. I don't know. Maybe that's not.
Does that mean you don't own yourself?
I don't know. Maybe. Yeah, sure. Why not? Let's go with that. Yeah, maybe. But Noah was just like is brand new to the SE community, and we had a really good interview. I really enjoyed talking to Noah, and I think he definitely seemed to immediately hit upon some of the really cool fundamental questions within SE. Seemed to be very aware of them. So I thought, for a show like this where we really want to make it accessible to a wide range of people, I think having someone that's basically really new to it and can ask questions and give us their thoughts would be really useful. So yeah, thanks ever so much for doing this, Noah. Especially we're all sort of slightly old hands at this a little bit, but such as old hands exist in this relatively new thing. But yeah, thank you for coming along and braving it. That's awesome.
Well, thank you for
welcome to the community.
Yeah, 100%. Yeah.
Thank you.
So, without further ado, so the purpose. So this is the first show. That's the reality we're in at the moment. So this is going to be a little bit figuring things out as we go along, which is fine. And one of the things that we want to do, obviously, on this show is we want to basically talk about SE topics, SE concepts and ideas, and discuss SE type things. But we'd really like to answer questions from the community, and there are a whole bunch of different ways that you can ask questions of us. You can certainly, and one of the easiest ways right now to ask us questions would be to post them in the chat. So feel free just to post a question. Just to make it super easy for me, if you could just at Deviant Robot when you're asking a question, and that way it will really get its attention to me and I'll be able to see it. So if you want to ask a question, just at Deviant Robot and then just pop your question in there, and we would be absolutely happy to do our best to answer it. Just to let you know, our answers are our own. We don't represent or speak for anybody else. We are just expressing our views. And one thing that's true about the SE community is there is a wide range of opinions and thoughts on almost every topic. And so we are just going to give you our best attempt at answering the question as best we can. But I think we've got some fairly experienced people here, and certainly some value in terms of hopefully we can offer you in terms of helping you find the answers to your questions. So so there's that. But until we get a question, sorry, one other thing I should mention is there's a little scrolly thing at the bottom. And if you wait about an hour and a half, eventually, it comes. Oh my God, that's perfect timing. Email your questions at se.questions@inspirereflection.com. There you go. There's the email address you can email. So if you don't get your question in today, or you think of a question at any point during the week, just email that email address with your question, let us know, and we'll attempt to answer it in the next show. Cool. Right. So in the absence, we have a question. So John, who's our moderator today, is asking, who is SE most beneficial for? For whom will it make the biggest difference to life? Gosh, that's a great question. Who benefits the most from SE? As in, are we talking about types of interlocutors here?
I'd say my answer for that would be society as a whole. I mean, the idea behind, street epistemology is to promote, critical thinking. I know it is about exploring our reasonings, but really what it is exploring critical thinking. So no one person alone benefits. Anybody who's using critical thinking, ultimately benefits society, because that means we're coming to more, rational justifications for things that we believe. And I see that just benefits everybody. Yeah.
Yeah. Any thoughts, David?
Yeah, I would say it would benefit anyone who values truth. I'm not sure if it would benefit people that don't care.
Yeah. That would be hard. And you do hear that. You hear people say, I don't care about what is true. That is always an alarming thing to hear somebody say. I'm never really sure what they mean by that. But yeah,
that's one of my first questions whenever I do in real life SE is, how important is it to you for your conclusions about the world to be accurate?
Right.
And it's all over the map.
Yeah.
And they say it for different reasons, and so that's something that you can explore right off the bat.
Yeah, 100%. Any thoughts on this one, Noah?
I think I agree with David's point. Primarily, I mean, it seems to be people who value truth, and there is a cohort of people that value truth, and they believe that, and they hold that in high regard, but they just might not realize at that moment that what they're believing isn't as close to the truth as they think. And people with that big delta between their current beliefs and the truth, who do value truth, I think they're the ones who get the most out of, at the very least, being interviewed and potentially interviewing others. And that's my, off the cuff answer. I think it's a complicated question. I would also say that there's a lot of value for the actual practitioners. It sort of forces you to engage with it in the same way. Like it would be really strange, I think, to honestly ask questions of other people without also applying them to yourself. And I think that the techniques help you determine that too. And so I guess we are the beneficiaries as well. The outside world might just be annoyed, but anyways, I think
that's true. I think a lot of people in the SE community speak about like how much it benefits them personally, not just when they're actually engaging with an SE conversation, but actually in general, like in day-to-day life. I think you couldn't help be better at thinking things through and applying critical thinking tools in your life if you spend an awful lot of your spare time having in conversations with people where you're trying to do that for them. And I think definitely it has benefits internally. One thing we talked about actually in our interview was this notion of like the different types of claims that are the most useful to explore. And I think like anybody who has a claim that is really genuinely important to them, and we talked about the idea that the claim is something that, were it to be different, that they would act differently in their life. I think that's what those are the claims that I think have the most impact in exploring and maybe utility as well. And so the idea that you could explore any kind of claim. You could explore the claim that tomato soup is the best type of soup. That's a fine claim. You could explore that, but it's much better to explore a claim that really might affect what you do tomorrow. Like that would be a great claim to explore. And I think anybody that's willing to explore a claim that would affect them in that way, with what we call doxastic openness, which just means being open to genuine inquiry, not being defensive, and just being open to actually exploring it, such that they would be willing to act differently tomorrow if their belief was to be honestly affected by the conversation. I think those people would definitely benefit the most from SE. And I can say that without saying whether they would have to change their mind or whether they would have to increase or reduce their confidence. It doesn't matter what the claim is. If it's a claim of that sort, I think they would benefit for sure. Awesome.
Yeah. I don't know if it necessarily needs to be a claim that like the interlocutor or the conversation partner thinks like they would act differently. It could be something mundane that maybe you've just never thought about. And the reason I bring this up is because like that's something that has changed with me is like, my idea around like taking medications, I've kind of, always kind of been like, oh, do we really need to take as much medications as we do? And, I kind of, reflected a lot on it. And, the reason that I kind of held that position was because I remember a friend from, elementary school. They used to, kind of like, oh, your parents think that there's a pill for everything. Right. It's like, that's not very good reason to believe something. And it's like, and I've just recently like rejected that belief. And is it that majorly impacting? Could be, it's not like I haven't taken medications, but, maybe there's somebody out there that might have that same sort of position, that maybe does affect them more where like they don't take medication at all. So right. Like it can change these things that maybe you haven't even thought about.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think it's in some ways what we're talking about is people, but in other ways what we're talking about is the types of claims. And yeah, it would seem that there are a lot of claims, and sometimes maybe even the ones that people don't even think need to be challenged. I think that's one of the interesting things about it. It's like claims that you just know are true, you treat as true, and you don't ever think about why you got to that position. Those kinds of impulse claims, those sort of positions that you get into, those can be genuinely really, really worth exploring. I've just noticed I've managed to get this to get stuck at the top here. I don't know why it's stuck. It won't change for me. So I've already broken the stream immediately. But so thanks, John, for that. That's a great first question. I think that's a great way to start. Gigi has asked, how does SE benefit you personally? Anybody have any thoughts on that? I could definitely.
I think I just gave an example of one. Yeah, but like there's lots of things that like ever since practicing street epistemology, I've become more critical of the things that I believe in, even without necessarily doing SE on them. It's just, thinking a little bit deeper of like, why do I believe this thing? Like, why am I doing this particular action or task? And, it's really leading me to make a lot of positive improvements in my life, because it's like I'm not holding on to these ideas that are perhaps, could be like more harmful, even though that I think that they're the opposite is true, like the medication thing, right? Like it's more beneficial for me to follow doctor's orders and take all of the necessary medications than to be more reserved with it. So like it's really good for those kind of reasons.
Yeah, in addition to having a better grasp on how I arrive at beliefs and the sufficiency of those reasons, it basically helps me have better conversations with people just in general. A big part of SE is building rapport. And so, just having better conversations, especially in this climate that we're currently living in. That's how it benefits me.
Yeah. I think for me personally, I don't know if you have any thoughts on this as somebody that's quite new to it. Maybe it's a bit early to say, but
well, I guess the techniques are what I would say are the most functionally useful. I mean, the ability to get somebody to let their guard down, sort of, in a traditional argument, everyone's guard is up. Your
Sure.
identity is wrapped up in whatever you're arguing. But it seems like with street epistemology, it's a very deliberate effort, combining the Socratic method with, Rappaport's rules, and you sort of end up in a situation where you're able to avoid the hostility. And that's essentially what David said, you have better conversations with those skills.
Yeah.
But yeah, I guess I think that we sort of already answered this question in the last question, but I think that's the way that
I think
most
it's
useful for me.
interesting you mentioned about the rapport there and the mentioning like cognitive dissonance. And what's interesting about like practicing SE and like the whole point is like trying to prevent that. So, and that's the idea behind like asking very good questions that are poignant but like not attacking, is that I've become not only aware of other people's dissonance but my own. And I think that's really important because like even in like practicing SE, if I'm being questioned, if the like people that are practicing it are new to it, and I can notice it like when I'm starting to experience cognitive dissonance because I feel as though I'm being attacked, and it really helps you like stop for a second and breathe and go, wait a second, like what's actually being communicated here.
That's interesting. Do you equate cognitive dissonance with being attacked?
I see it as sort of, it's a defense mechanism, right? That's enabled to protect your brain from itself, right?
Right. Well, so I think, I don't know. Maybe I'm misunderstanding. Maybe my definition is slightly wrong. But my feeling is, I thought that cognitive dissonance was that feeling that you get when you suddenly realize two conflicting ideas exist in your head at the same time. It's that discomforting feeling. It's not a nice feeling.
Yep.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I think cognitive dissonance is a great sign that if somebody starts to feel a little bit of cognitive dissonance, I think that's a great sign that your SE session is being effective. And that was actually a question I had to talk about today, which is how can you know that an SE conversation is being effective? What's the sign of successful SE? And I think noticing that somebody appears to be experiencing cognitive dissonance would be a good sign, I think, because the thing about cognitive dissonance is it's not really about an argument coming from the outside that you're having to defend yourself against. It's about a conflicting internal state. And that I think is really, really important as a difference. It's not, it's the person's own mental models and machinery genuinely having to realize that you've got two different systems and they're coming up with two different answers, and you can't just arbitrarily choose one or the other. You've got to square that somehow. So I think cognitive dissonance is great.
Sure, and I think the important part to recognize there is that, like, when your conversation partner or you're noticing them start to experience is not to necessarily push them harder, which could put the walls up and really like exacerbate that defense mechanism, but to try to like encourage them, like, let's think a little bit clearly, like give them the two different examples and kind of let them come to their own conclusions. And I think that's the important part about that, like self-realization, is like noticing whether or not you're putting up walls or if you're actually like thinking about these things too clearly.
John posts, yeah, I would agree with you. John posts a question which is, I think, designed never to be able to fit in my obviously very terse space that I've got on stream for this questions. But he says, many times through SE, the conversation partner will get to realize I don't know, or realize that they don't have good reasons to hold a belief. Have you noticed that to some people, ambiguity is intolerable? They have to have an answer, even if it's a wrong one, is preferable to knowing that they don't know, rather than saying they don't know. What, if anything, is to be done in such cases? Yeah, it's interesting. I've recently had a conversation on the Deviant Robot Discord server that sort of fell into these lines, I think, where the null hypothesis seems to be in question, and the people seem to believe that they have to have answers for questions that are unanswerable. My favorite example of this is the origin of reality or the universe, where I say the universe is either infinite, which makes no sense to me, it's finite, which makes no sense to me, or it's something else which really makes no sense to me. So the one thing I can say for sure about the origin of the universe is it doesn't make sense to me. I don't have a way of handling it. And I'm okay with that. I totally have been okay with that for the longest time. There are things about, my actual house. Do you know what doesn't make sense to me? What didn't make sense to me recently was the tire pressure of my bicycle tire. I didn't have a proper handle on that. It didn't make sense to me that the tire pressure was as high as it was. That surprised me. Now, if I can't intuitively have a grasp of what my appropriate bicycle tire pressure should be, why do I think my mental models and frameworks should be able to expand to actually understand and have an intuition about the origins of the universe? I think it's strange to me that people do feel this impulse, which they definitely do seem to feel, which is to claim knowledge or to grab a junk answer if they can't find a better one. And as for how to deal with it, I don't know. Do you guys have any thoughts on that, chaps?
How to deal with the emotional side of our being? I think that's what part of being a social species is. And I think that's kind of what makes street epistemology very helpful, is like we need others to help us be more rational, because our emotions are there to help protect us from, dying. And in a more advanced society, we need that the groupthink, the more rational, critical thinking to like really develop further.
Yeah. Any thoughts, David?
Yeah, I think that's what makes us human, like you were saying. I think what can be beneficial is just be open to learning. Usually whenever there's like a professional interview, the person that is being interviewed is the expert, right? So when you want to find out from the expert whatever that interview is about. And so the idea is, since they're the expert in their beliefs and you want to learn, just be that open mind you want them to have.
That's nice.
Which is part of, displaying the behavior that you want them to have, and just showing that you're there to listen to them and learn from them. That can do a lot to kind of take some of your emotion out of it, which, isn't always the best thing to have, depending on the claim, that is.
I have to ask, does that expression come from somewhere, or is that a David original? Be the open mind you want them to have?
I want to say it might have been Gandhi that said something like that.
There's an expression which is like, be the change you want to see, right? And that I'm familiar with. But that was perfect. I mean, as answers to go for this question, I think that is absolutely beautiful. Be the open mind you want them to have. Help them see the value in it by you being open-minded and reflecting that and allowing them to think about it through your way of seeing things. So that's great.
Yeah. This is Nathan from Abstract Activist's motto on his YouTube channel.
I haven't seen that. Well, I've seen his channel. I haven't seen his motto. Maybe I must have just been blind to it. But that's great. That's really well done then. Yeah, GG to Nathan for that, because that's just a great way of expressing it, I think. Awesome. Noah, do you have any thoughts on how to talk to people who insist on having junk answers?
I actually do. So on the subject of you being the change you want to see, I think that where we might be getting this from is actually maybe Michael Jackson, the Man in the Mirror song, if you remember. Maybe that's where we're confusing Michael Jackson with Gandhi, and
how often does that have to happen before we finally get around to sorting which one of those which?
I'm mostly kidding. I don't actually. I'm sure that's not a novel idea from Michael Jackson. But anyways, so with respect to the trying to move somebody from the desire to clamp their belief system, to something regardless of the evidence. It seems to me, and let me know what you guys think of this, that the likelihood that someone wants to do that is directly correlated with how important that belief could be for their life, or the consequences there. And so you see this a lot with theists, right? The idea that, well, at least we have an answer, right? That's an important thing. If the consequences and the stakes are, heaven or hell, right? Like, yeah, you do. If you're in that environment and you're in that framework where, okay, if I have the answers wrong here, the stakes are heaven or hell, then there's a lot more pressure on them internally to come up with an answer, regardless of whether or not it's founded on, strong evidence. And for us, just kind of making an assumption that the majority of us are not theists, the stakes aren't that high. It's unlikely that, we're going to have that same emotional attachment to having a correct answer. And so I think that recognizing that there is that difference, we've already done that. Like, they have a desire for having the right answer. But in terms of making progress towards that, I think that you just have to sort of go to the root causes of why they feel that the stakes are that high, right? Because that can get them to maybe progressively lower their expectations about what they need to believe to be true. Because if the question, like, okay, and I'm just going to use the example here, like, I don't know, the theist argument, like, you have to have an answer as to whether or not God exists, or where morals come from. If you can show them how the stakes aren't really that high, I think that you can get them into a position where they're less likely to clamp their answer to, one of the two sides of the magnet, instead of being in this ambiguity where the evidence really is most aligned at the present moment. So that's my thought on it. I recognize that was kind of a word dump.
That's good. No, I mean, what you're talking about fundamentally is empathy. I mean, initially recognizing that, this person has a motivated rationalizing process that is getting them to this point, right? And that could be fear of consequences of being wrong. So they could be playing Pascal's wager. It could be just indoctrination, frankly. It could be just they've learned that this needs to be the answer. There's social and personal reasons, to motivate the answer. So yeah, I think.
Oh, sorry.
No, go ahead. No, go ahead, David.
I'll go ahead and finish.
Oh,
okay. I was just gonna say that this brings up number 14 on I believe it's number 14 on the Street Epistemology Survey, which the statement is, without an explanation for something, any answer is better than no answer.
Right.
And for those that are not familiar with the survey, it's a list of 24 statements in which you can agree to different levels, like strongly disagree, all the way up to strongly agree. And the survey is a good way of exploring somebody's relationship with truth. And so, yeah, that speaks right to that question itself. So I didn't want to miss that.
Yeah, no problem. That's cool. It's cool. That survey always has something to say. And it's definitely been forged from the experience of having to have a lot of very similar conversations, I think, and offers some useful tools. So, but yeah, I think empathizing with your interlocutor is definitely important, and I think then on top of that, as you suggest, Noah, I think helping them understand that maybe the consequences of changing their view are not quite so as dramatic as they might immediately feel that they would be. It's very difficult. One of the things, of course, is the burden of proof, which kind of relates to this, which is there's an argument to say, or people will make the argument that deciding, for example, not to believe in God is just as strong a statement as deciding to believe in God, and therefore, if it's both definitive statements, then where's your evidence essentially not to believe? That sort of tone of conversation, and I think in those situations, I think it's really important to try to demonstrate the nature of the null hypothesis, and the one strategy I've taken to try to do, and I was trying last night in a Discord conversation, but was I try to introduce the perspective of a baby. which sounds strange, but babies by default don't believe anything, right? They believe they are hungry or tired, or they may have pooped, right? But they're really ambiguous about most of those things, and that's about all they believe. As they get older, they learn language, they learn to recognize things, they build agency, and they begin to adopt an understanding of the world. A baby essentially starts to have beliefs about the world at a certain point. Children start to develop beliefs about the world. By default, they don't believe anything. And I use the example of the existence of the planet Saturn. So babies don't believe in the existence of the planet Saturn any more than they believe in anything else. And so at some point, they are given some information, some new information comes along, and they have to decide how they're going to treat this information. And babies and children especially are given all kinds of garbage information. They're told things about unicorns, right? They're told that unicorns are these wonderful magical things. They're told about Santa Claus. Sorry, kids. They're told about all kinds of other entities in the world. Their worlds are full of half-truths and fairy tales and fictions and non-fictions, and it makes it very confusing for them. But eventually they begin to understand what the difference between something that's being told to them that's true, real, important, and something that maybe is just a fictitious story, a fictitious narrative, but they have to come to believe in or not believe these things. But in any case, the really important thing is the default position is not believing any of it. That you don't have a belief in something you've not heard of, for example. It takes information to convince you of its truth. So now the question just becomes about what kinds of evidence are you accepting as sufficient to change your perception from not believing in it to actually taking it seriously and believing in it. And so I think the null hypothesis is somewhat biological.
It's tricky too, because babies or little kids get the same information about unicorns and the Tooth Fairy and Santa Claus from the same people that are telling them that the stove is hot.
Yeah.
And so it gets really tricky about, well, of course, they have really good reasons to believe other things that from the same source that they're getting that the stove is hot.
Yeah.
And so that can be really tricky.
Don't put the fork in the electrical socket. Don't run out into the street. Mm-hmm. Don't put your hand on the hot stove. Make sure you pray 5 times a day to the right God. That's all coming from the same voice and with the same level of conviction and same level of and urgency and all of this. And so empathizing with that is definitely important, because that's definitely a reason to empathize with anybody believing anything.
It really led me to a deep trust in authority for this reason, is because from a very young age I've learned that these authority figures that are telling me don't burn the stove or don't touch the hot stove are also telling me things like Santa Claus and Easter Bunny and gods.
Right.
And it's and I've realized that the reason that I hold this distrust for authority is because of these reasons. I've been lied to so much, and I've learned through, rationale that, just because somebody tells you something doesn't mean it's true.
Right.
So it always leaves me, questioning.
Yeah. In many ways, a lot of it is arguments from authority. I've had this conversation before around the idea that science, for example, is a whole body. For most people, is an argument from authority. Importantly, science isn't actually an argument from authority, because if you want to, you can educate yourself sufficiently to get the education necessary to be able to read the papers, to be able to follow the studies, to be able to question the studies, to read all of the studies that it's based on, to understand the entire academic path as far down as you want to go. The investment of that is non-trivial for most people. And so functionally, science becomes an argument from authority. Scientists say jumping 3 times a day will make you live 3 times longer. Scientists say, and you hear this a lot, and it is argument from authority. So
I think that's a confusion, right? Because scientists don't speak in the definitive like a lot of people believe. They don't say jumping from 10 times a day will make you live till 100. What they say is studies show that if it will increase your chances of.
Of course.
And
no scientist would say that.
Right. Yeah, exactly. It's a these are things that studies show, but we don't actually know. But we have evidence to support that. It's more likely. The probability is increasing if you do these things.
The Dunning-Kruger effect is in full. But the reality here is that they don't read the paper. That's what the paper says. The magazine article that's written on the back of what the paper said, of course, says jumping chocolate cures. There's a beautiful book called Bad Science by Ben Goldacre. And he in that book he basically collects all kinds of terrible science in popular media, and in fact in science, and he points out all these brilliant examples. And one of them, he said, in one month of June, he said he collected something like 16 different articles that said that coffee both cured and caused cancer, pretty much alternately. And of course you read the paper and it never says anything of the sort, but.
My favorite one example was of farts. Breathing farts increases your lifespan, and it was there was a study done where it's there was this one gas that in certain concentrations has some positive effects on your living, and that's what the study said. And then and really it's just it's a trace gas that happens to also exist in a fart. It has nothing to do with farts. The scientists didn't test the farts, and it's but that's what the media portrayed it as.
It's scary, but it's always scientists say as well, as if scientists were a single collective coherent narrative of one. There's just they've gotten together and concluded. It's not good. Sorry, David.
Yeah, it's less about making truth claims and more about explaining the natural world based on the current evidence that we have, with the idea that if more information comes in, it can be updated.
That's exactly right, and I think that's how we, in a genuinely interesting sense, I feel that science codifies what children do naturally. Science codifies the way that human beings explore the world and understand it. Once you realize people can't necessarily be trusted, most children become highly suspicious of almost everything, and then start to test assumptions and find ways to validate their claims. And science functionally codifies that. I mean, babies are great scientists. They'll, maybe not babies, but children, young children are great scientists. They will explore and experiment, and, they will put the fork in the electrical socket. The problem is, and this is an interesting thing, Richard Dawkins talks about the God Delusion, maybe some evolutionary pressure that encourages religiosity in humans, because religiosity in humans, for example, or the ability to want to believe complex narratives around authority figures, for example, that such like deities, They're sufficiently ubiquitous. Societies keep inventing them. It keeps happening. So there must likely be some kind of biological reason for it. And one of his conclusions is in the God Delusion. He says it's not definitive, but it's just a way of thinking about it. But he talks about the children that live in a tribe and that they tell the story of the red berries. The red berries are bad. Right, so the parent says the red berries are bad. And there are two types of children in the world. There are the children that would experiment for themselves and die of red berry poisoning. or the children that blindly follow the parents' injunction without question. And so it firstly sets up a worrying trend that we are all the victims of perhaps slightly too incurious people. That maybe we aren't naturally inclined to push the authority figure, challenge the authority figure, because it would have been bad for our survival had we done so, and still is. The children that really want to do the hard experimenting on the electrical socket with the metal fork, they're not going to do very well in life. The flip side of this then becomes that you become so invested emotionally, narratively in the idea of authorities telling you what to do, that when you realize your parents aren't sufficiently able to give you good reasons, that impulse, that drive to want the authority figure to help you navigate the world still exists and is somewhat usurped by religious narratives and cult-like narratives, for example. It's an interesting theory. I think it. Does anybody have any thoughts on that?
Well, I was going to say, if we have any time at the end, I've got more about Santa Claus that we can discuss.
Stay tuned, kids. David's got some hot takes on the Santa Claus issue.
Yeah,
exactly.
Yeah, I do.
Fantastic.
Sorry. Right, the thing with evolution is it's not about what is true or correct. It's about what works, right?
Right.
So as long as we keep on running away from the sound in the bush, we keep surviving, and appealing to authority of older people who have said, "Hey, this works. I'm still alive." There's no direct harm necessarily from that, because you're going to keep surviving.
Yeah.
But it doesn't mean that it is like the best method or model to work with in order to continue to survive. There could be other ways.
Well, and this is where something like SE is useful, right? Because if there are lots of mechanisms in the world that will naturally incline us towards potentially believing things that aren't true, even if they are superficially potentially useful, or at least useful in a sense to us at some point evolutionarily, right? It takes something like science to try to remove that human intuition from the equation and start to actually build a mechanism for studying things without that bias. Try to work very hard to remove that assumption bias. And it would take something like SE, I think, to do that same kind of work in the public space, in public discourse, which is, I think, what SE is really good for. So yeah, that's cool. So Gigi has confirmed that she thinks that I got cognitive dissonance right, so that's great. Thanks, Gigi. I'll take affirmations all day. Avoiding the question of or equivalence or equivocating are defense mechanisms. Yes, exactly. Yes, if anybody's avoiding questions or equivocating, for sure. Yeah. Equivocating is especially a difficult one. The equivocation fallacy is one of the trickier ones to spot, I think, because we fall into it quite often. For anybody not familiar, does anybody want to give a definition? I can give mine, but does anybody else want to give a definition of the equivocation fallacy? Nope.
It's basically like making comparisons that aren't necessarily there, right?
Yeah, and often baked into language as well. You could say that there's a great thought experiment. I'm going to screw it up, but there's a version of it that says something like a cheese sandwich is better. Sorry, nothing is better than the best possible good for everybody, and you could agree to that potentially. Probably not you lot because you're argumentative, but in theory, somebody might agree that nothing is better than the maximum possible well-being, say, for everybody. And then we would say a cheese sandwich is better than nothing. And then you could say, okay, well, that means a cheese sandwich is better than the maximum possible well-being for everybody. and it syllogistically seems fine, right? It seems like, but we've made the mistake of treating the word nothing, even though it's the same word, in very different ways in that sentence. And so equivocation fallacy is when people do that. It is difficult to spot in language.
Yeah, deepities kind of come to mind when I hear about equivocation.
They can trigger deepities for sure. It sounds profound until you realize that actually it's just a trick of language. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Word salads. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Word salads, quantum word salads. They're the better ones to look out for.
When you start asking the questions of, well, what does that word mean? And
quantum resonant. Resonance is a resonant quantum word salads. Those are the best possible. Yes, but that's true. But we naturally, the way we parse language, I think, inclines us towards not noticing these things as nearly as often as perhaps we should. Gigi says Bogosian and Lindsay are also say something in Impossible Conversations about the modeling the kind behavior you want to see in your conversation partner. That's right. I mean, one of the key points of rapport building, I think, is reflecting the behavior you want to see in your conversation partner. So if they're getting agitated, for example, if they're getting frustrated and snapping or being terse with you, well, firstly, that's a great sign that maybe you should stop the conversation, because maybe it's already gone too far at that point. But the one thing you absolutely should not do is respond by escalating in kind. If they raise their voice, you should lower yours. Don't raise it to meet where they are. And I think you being the model of the type of person you want your conversation partner to be is really effective as a tool.
Will calm down. Just listen to my voice. It's okay.
No force on earth can calm me down. This has been tried.
Yeah, there's something to be said about not only do we want to build rapport, but we want to maintain rapport and possibly repair lost rapport.
Yes.
Big concept in SE.
What do you guys think to the concept of spending rapport?
Ooh, yes.
Yeah.
I think there's definitely questions and times to utilize it. And like when you feel as though you have good rapport, if you've really gotten to the heart and core of the reasonings, now is that time to present those two options and like cash it in, right?
Yeah. I wonder, the spending rapport thing is interesting because I wonder if there's a temptation to try to come away with a net zero in terms of rapport building. So you build up sufficient rapport. So just in case anybody's unfamiliar with the concept of spending rapport, the principle is there are some things you could ask, some points you could make that might seem disagreeable to that person. And if you've built up a certain level of rapport, you might be a little bit disagreeable with them, at the expense of maybe losing some of that rapport, but at the benefit of being able to ask a slightly more pointed question. And you certainly need to earn the rapport before you build it. What you can't do is get into a sort of rapport deficit. Paying back rapport debt probably is going to be not an option because they'll just walk away from you, or worse. But in any case, I think if you've built up a certain level of rapport, then it's possible to ask them a question that maybe compromises that a little bit, and in that sense, you could be said to be spending your rapport. I think it's an interesting idea.
Yeah, I think Gigi just said that they don't like the idea of spending rapport, and I think there can be something almost egregious about it because it seems as though like almost manipulative. And yeah, I mean, you just talking about it and mentioning it kind of does almost seem that way. But I mean, I guess if you're looking to actually build critical thinking, you kind of got to divert a little bit away from like the emotional holdings to certain ideas.
What you can ask the same question, and depending on the level of rapport that you've built, can have a big difference on their ability to reflect. And the question can be exactly the same. If you don't have the rapport, that could shut them down, build up defenses. But if you have that rapport already and you ask that same question, that could be really meaningful for them too.
Yeah, I wonder what these kinds of questions are. I mean, I have a sense of the idea, but in some ways, I think it might just be. I would be surprised to if it was true that the only way that point or question could be asked would be at the cost of some rapport. Like it may be just expediency on the SE, the street epistemologist part, that they might ask the question pointedly, rather than carefully at the expense of the rapport, rather than thinking of better way of framing or asking the question. I suspect that might be true. I would definitely be interested if there were questions that needed to be asked at the expense of rapport. But
this is sort of reminding me of the earlier conversation we were having, where we were asking what kinds of claims are best worth exploring. And it seems like the closer somebody, like if a claim is going to be more likely to alter someone's behavior, in fact, it's going to require a great deal more rapport in the beginning and expenditure later to successfully, establish show them where they might be having epistemological issues. However, I wonder if maybe it could be also the case that by picking a more mundane claim that they don't get a sense of identity, but it's a perfect stand-in, so to speak, for the claim that you're actually exploring. You might be able to not have to worry about losing your rapport with them and still have the same effect of not questioning, but having a conversation about the belief that you actually are more interested in. I think that identifying what those equivalences are might be a little bit harder, but that could be the solution here. Like, I think that to lose rapport, like there's going to be some amount of rapport that gets lost just in the nature of having a conversation about beliefs. There's no way around that. But anytime that we recognize that for what it is as the baseline and then deviate from it by asking harder questions that might, it's sort of a gamble. We don't know how they're going to react to that. And you might end up stopping a conversation right at that moment before aporia. And ultimately lose them when instead of
snatching defeat from the jaws of victory.
Yeah, but if you instead explore a more a claim that's less associated with their identity, then it doesn't really require the same amount of rapport manipulation. And I'm wondering if it's possible to target that kind of claim more precisely and more easily, but then just leave it to them to recognize where the conflict is, because ultimately that's what we have to ask for them anyways, is to identify where that conflict is. And maybe at the very last question, once they've gotten through that, then just say, okay, how does it, would the same logic apply to the other claim? Yeah. And then walk away.
One last question. How could you?
You know what I mean?
Yes. I saw everybody slightly wince at the phrase manipulation, which I think wasn't quite the way we would want to frame it. But yeah, I understand what you mean. I think the idea of spending firstly, the idea of addressing a less contentious conversation. And essentially, one of the interesting things is, I think, once people start to apply critical thinking in one area of their life, like, it's very difficult for them not to start thinking about applying it in other areas of their life. So maybe it's possible to have the conversation about something less contentious and essentially just establish the principles and then allow that naturally to become a useful tool that they might apply to other areas of their life, which may be more contentious to talk about directly. So that's definitely really interesting. I think the idea that for some people, asking them about some ideas that they hold is an attack by default. Like they are the opposite of doxastically open. They are completely closed, and in fact, just even going near a certain subject will cause a very significant emotional concern and response. And I think for people like that, you would be quite right to say that you probably couldn't even have that conversation without at least putting them on the back foot, having an initially negative rapport building position. But yeah, that was interesting. And there was something I saw Snotty posted, the idea, if you want to minimize risk 100%, then don't talk to them. That's certainly the only way to get through that. Yes, I would agree.
This kind of ties back to one of the earlier questions about how do you know if you've had a successful SE conversation?
Right.
And one of my metrics that I use is, do they want to have another one sometime soon?
Yeah.
And this is the whole idea behind the little puzzle piece gears that we hand out for people that have done one. Here's you get to pick one of these 3 colors. And the idea is, if you have another conversation with me, you can earn another one. You can build out the whole set. that kind of entices them to maybe it gives them something to remind them of the conversation, but it's also an invitation to have another one.
Yeah.
And that could be a good metric to use. And maybe you don't want to spend a lot of rapport points in the first conversation, and maybe spend more of that rapport that you've earned in the second conversation or the third.
Yeah.
There's always a chance that you'll be able to talk to them again, and they can give you more information based on hopefully what they've thought about, because a lot of the reflection happens in between talks, not during the conversation.
Yes.
And not necessarily right afterwards. So something to keep in mind there.
That's 100% brilliant. So I would say, yeah, I think if you've spent rapport so much that they don't want to have another conversation with you, I think you've definitely gone too far. Like, I think that would be a good sign that you've spent too much of the rapport, and that they would be less than interested in talking to you again. It may be you didn't get to that threshold. Maybe you couldn't have built up so much rapport, and that might be more about how they see strangers and all the topic. So maybe you wouldn't get there. But if you felt that you had gotten to the point where that they might have another conversation with you, and spent sufficient rapport with them such that they wouldn't, I think that would definitely be a mistake for sure. And I think also it's probably one of the signs perhaps of the temptation to spend rapport would be actually indicative of chasing what you might consider to be a successful outcome too aggressively. And I think this idea of letting somebody walk away, like maybe not going all the way to the end, but just getting them to start thinking about something with the idea of them coming back and following up. Because yeah, I think most of the most effective SE probably happens in the shower the next day, when they're just not really thinking about it, and they're just like, what, this idea is slightly bubbling around in their head. And that's probably when they're like, yeah, God, why did that guy say that? Or like, what was that they were talking about? And I think that's probably sometimes people talk about this. It's a really horrible metaphor, but the pebble in the shoe is the metaphor, which is this something they go away with that they can't ignore and they have to address. Unfortunately, pebbles in the shoe aren't particularly pleasant, and I think sometimes having these kinds of thought processes may not be pleasant, but doesn't have to be unpleasant. So maybe we need another metaphor there, but yeah, I can totally agree. Anything to add, Sushi, or no? Any thoughts?
Yeah, I'm not entirely sure how to take off from there.
Yeah, no, that's fine.
I did.
We've got so much in chat; it's ridiculous. I'm so behind.
yeah. Maybe go a little bit with chat. I was going to say there was the idea around, the rapport, and that somebody that you feel as though you're never getting rapport with, and it's like some interlocutors or conversation partners, a lot of the time is just spent, listening. Right, a lot of active listening, more so than asking those questions, and like that would be like sometimes you just have to wait for and hopefully get that second interview where they can maybe, take time to, think about things and then come back, and then maybe ask your questions then, once they've had some time to reflect.
Yeah, makes sense.
Something I'm thinking of now, really, if you think about the purpose of a thought experiment. A thought experiment seems primarily designed to give somebody a safe sandbox in which they can explore an idea without the risks. And I'm trying to determine, is there such a thing for, if you're doing pure street epistemology, it's sort of, you want to only offer things when asked. But it seems like thought experiments could be super useful for helping somebody without personally being attached to the outcome of their logic, determine whether or not they're I guess you guys understand what I'm saying. Like, that doesn't require rapport. A thought experiment is a rapport neutral sort of circumstance. And if the interlocutor is being honest, then they should be able to follow a thought experiment to wherever it leads for them. And that can be a stand-in again for their actual beliefs. But with pure street epistemology, we're really going for the beliefs directly. So I wonder if perhaps the thought experiment approach could be, strategically injected into the process in such a way that you're able to do these things that would otherwise cost rapport safely.
I think that's the idea kind of behind the the outsider test is kind of exactly that, is like using an example that's not directly correlated with their beliefs that you can apply the same logic to and work them through. And then the hard part is like getting them to then take that same logic and apply it to that belief. And it really depends on the interlocutor if they are open to that idea, or some people just won't do it. Because like I've had it before where it's like, I've had an interlocutor and presented them, they're like, oh yeah, this is terrible, and go through it, and then it's like, well, how about here? And then just not get the connection. Yeah. And like, how do you build that connection? That's the hard part.
Mm-hmm. One problem with I love thought experiments. I think they're great because I think they create that clean case that might otherwise be complicated by lots of emotional and sort of personal attachments, and I think it helps really. They can really help. Part of the problem I've noticed is that some people can see them as traps. I mean, they're initially defensive of them because people will tend to construct the thought experiment in such a way as it clearly demonstrates their point. And if you are dishonest in your intentions, you will create a thought experiment that simultaneously strawmans and the opposing view, and essentially creates a sort of forced mechanism by which the person has to concede the point. So I think some people become wary of thought experiments and concerned about it. I just noticed the Tic Tacs floating out. Yeah, exactly. These kinds of tools are great, but I think it's not entirely unheard of that people can be wary of them, and I can sort of understand why, because it's thought experiments are. They feel like traps. They can feel like traps. If somebody's is suspicious and already concerned about your motives for having the conversation, then I think they can be concerning.
Same goes with hypotheticals, that kind of thing.
Right. Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
Maybe it has to do with the order of operations. I have a book. I got it for my birthday. Basically, some number of hundreds of thought experiments in philosophy, and on the left page it's the experiment, and on the right it's some discussion of it. And there are thought experiments in there that are stand-ins for like environmental activism or abortion or any other sort of moral question. And as you're reading it, or even nuclear power, whether or not nuclear power is justified, right? Like there are these questions that are presented in it, and if you don't know where the thought experiment is going or why, like what the subject is in advance, then it's extremely powerful in the sense that you'll come to the conclusion and then know what it's about afterwards. I think that's difficult to do in a conversation because you have to have a claim that you're exploring in the first place. But if it were somehow possible to inject the thought experiment in a way where there is no sense of a trap, and I think that might just be a matter of order. But again, that's kind of an open question. Like, can you do that effectively in a conversation? It doesn't seem intuitively as though you could, but imagine how powerful it would be to do the outsider test before getting onto a claim of faith. Right. That would, and do it first, and then there you go. You'll have somebody will realize that. And anyways, I just
that's great. John just wrote trust with 3 exclamation marks in chat, which I think is is a key part of it. I think part of the problem though, if you start talking to people about thought experiments before they have a sense of where the conversation's going, again, it's a very fine line between what is an effective tool to help somebody realize something that might be contradictory or disagreeable to them about the way they see the world, and what is manipulation in terms of trying to get them into believing what you believe about the world. And I think if we're not empathetic enough, and we start setting up our store with them by addressing lots of thought experiment type positions in order to get them into make some agreements before we can start to continue, I think it's likely to put people on the defensive who are not genuinely massively doxastically open already. And I think that's a challenge. Like the SE survey, for example, it suggested that these are a series of questions you can ask somebody in order to gauge their response and know sort of roughly what kinds of questions you might want to challenge them on. But just going through those questions, I think I could imagine how it could feel like you are setting up a psychological trap that is leading them down a path, right? And And I think some of, for example, one of the things that we as street epistemologists will do at the beginning of a conversation is ask for confidence. And I've heard people complain that just even asking for your confidence on a belief is already setting up a paradigm by which you are advantaging your own argumentative style, and therefore disadvantaging other positions that you might not agree with. I don't agree with that, but I think it's worth noticing that objection, and I think that realizing that people might have that. One thing I just wanted to say briefly on the topic of thought experiments is I think you should always be prepared to alter the conditions of the thought experiments on the fly if your conversation partner is challenging them or feeling uncomfortable with them for any reason. And I think if you do that charitably as much as you can, I think even if you can't get to the end of the thought experiment, it can be really useful to think about how could we construct a thought experiment together that would help us understand this point better. And I think that could be a useful way of going about it.
To build on that and to go off of what Noah said is like, this is where like when working with thought experiments, the active listening really comes in, asking and building the thought experiment with your interlocutor. You have to, like when doing SE, we have to try to remain biased, and part of that is being open to the idea of being wrong, and not making assumptions. So like talk to your conversation partner, ask them questions to actually get their view and perspective, and then build on it from there. And then you can try to make a thought experiment around that idea and help them build it with you. That way you're not like making assumptions, like having the beans or the Tic Tac example. Those are great, but like people can feel that because they may have heard something similar before. Right. So if you're building it alongside of them with it, it's the frog being boiled in warm water rather than putting into hot water, right?
Right.
You're bringing them along for the journey, and a part of it, and basing it on their actual view and opinion rather than your perhaps flawed assumptions.
We haven't talked a whole lot about consent yet, and I think that one thing that might help would be to get that consent to do a thought experiment.
Right.
And not only that, but being able to read the room or know your audience, as it were, can be a great benefit in conducting a thought experiment, like you were talking about, Will, like being able to adapt it based on the signals that you're getting from them, and that takes the active listening that you were talking about, Sushi.
Yeah, I think there's also the opportunity when talking about it. One of the things that Doug from Pine Creek has said before, and I've used as advice in an SE call-in show previously, was that this idea of saying, look, if the person you're talking to is suspicious of, or appears to be suspicious of your motives, you could say, like assume that this is dishonest. Okay, rather than try to just convince them that it's not going to be, let's just say that, let's assume that this is dishonest. I'm going to give you the thought experiment. Maybe you could help me understand where it is that where do you notice it being dishonest? What parts of it feel dishonest to you? And I think that kind of talk can help get past doxastic closure. Makes the person feel like they're not being swindled unknowingly. Makes them feel heard if they're expressing any kind of uncertainty about a thought experiment, and I think that can help you also start doing that work of perhaps retailoring the thought experiment to the comfort level of the person you're speaking to. But yeah, I think this is good stuff. I like it. Yeah. I'm so behind on chat, I've got no idea. I'm going to read this. Stump Invention says, I'm wondering if someone with dark personality traits, undefined dark personality traits, I don't know what that means, can use street epistemology to create a societal deviance with ease. If there are people that might exist, how do we identify them and mitigate their effects? So I'm gonna reinterpret that a little bit, and Stump Inventions, do let me know if I've gotten this wrong. But I think what we might be saying is, what if there are bad actors within the SE community using street epistemology? How might we notice that, and how might we address that? I think that's a really great question. Like, what if there are people with genuinely bad intentions within the SE community using SE? Does anybody do you want to start on that one? Sushi, do you have any thoughts? Nope.
Sorry, I was typing.
Sushi was cool. We get it. David, do you have any thoughts on this one?
Yeah, this reminds me of a. So I used to work at a car dealership, and it was a great location, tons of traffic, and there was a small group of people that decided that they were going to take their grievance and hold signs right in front of our car dealership about how terrible the service was, or it was something about, it's a car dealership, right? So the owner, brilliant, had every available staff go out and join them with their own signs saying how great the car dealership was. And it just made it look like everybody involved, because there was way more of us than there was of them. And so it made it look like they were part of we love our car dealership. We love our brand, honk if you love us. And I guess my point is, doing good SE would be my response to that concern.
Interesting. Yeah. Go out and do better, SE. Yeah.
Yeah.
To see, we can use like the atom bomb as an example.
Oh, now you
right?
want to talk. I mean, I threw over to you right at the beginning, and now all of a sudden he's jumping in with his opinions. I mean, good God.
And an atom bomb, no less.
Yeah, with the atom bomb, right? Einstein with the E equals MC squared, right? And we unlocked the power of the atom, and science didn't tell anybody what to do with it, right? People did. People decided that we can use it for nuclear power, or we can use it for bombs. And that's kind of the thing with SE, is it's a tool, and it's kind of up to the people to do it with what they please. And like what Dave said is, like, part of it is like going out and doing SE so that we're promoting the best end of it, and trying to minimize the the bad actors.
I love that your non-phatic indicator for bombs is this symbol for some reason. I don't. This is bombs.
Bombs. Oh my.
Bombs.
I got nothing. Do you have any thoughts, Noah?
I think I agree with Sushi's analysis of it. Essentially, you can use it for good or evil, right? But how to identify that? I mean, it's really no different from identifying how we're using atomic energy for good or evil, right? It's you sort of, I don't know if there's a reliable way. I mean, David suggested, if it's good SE, right, then there shouldn't be any, persuasive tactics used in a direct sense, right? Maybe that's the indicator in which somebody is using it for persuasion rather than to encourage openness. But I think that ultimately it's going to come down to the practical outcome of what the practitioner is doing. I'm not sure. It's a hard question, because it can look almost exactly the same between somebody who's using it for some ulterior motive and somebody who's not. I mean, we talked about this, William. I'm personally right now at this point, I'm still trying to determine how much room there is for conflict between the interlocutor and the practitioner, right? Like, in a sense, you have to have some disagreement or conflict, and if otherwise it would just be a boring, mundane claim that you agree with, right? And so at what point do you draw the line where you want to start allowing for these tactics? And the answer to that's unclear to me. I don't think there should be an absolutist. Okay, never ever try to sway somebody. Because I think that if your goal is, it depends on what your goal is. If your goal is to make the world a more open place or get closer to the truth, then it's hard to remove yourself and your own biases from that. But anyways, in terms of identifying it, I think you just have to look at the goals of the person doing it.
Yeah, I would agree. So one thing is, I don't think you need to agree with your interlocutor to do SE with them. I think that's really important, and it's a mistake a lot of people, I think, will quite reasonably make about it when they look at the claims that are being explored, and they might reflect on that with regards to what they believe. And I think there might be a slight bias as well in terms of the kinds of SE conversations that get posted to the internet are most likely to be ones where the conversation was perhaps one of where the SE and the conversation partner had differing views. And I think that makes for more entertaining SE, but it doesn't necessarily make for better SE. And I think that you could quite reasonably and easily do SE on a claim that you agree with. And I have done that. And I'm sure I'm not the only one. I'm sure lots of us have done that. I know that David, for example, has spent some time trying to do SE. David, do you want to explain how you've tried to solve this problem before I address the good actor issue? But your solution to this is brilliant. I loved it.
Remind me what the idea is.
This is
Remind me of what my idea was again, please.
Yeah.
I had a good
Tell
idea.
me more about my brilliant idea, please.
This is your brilliant hidden claim idea.
The blind claim. Yeah.
Oh, hidden claim.
Yeah.
Hidden claim.
So she got it.
Yeah. Well, yeah. Hidden claim. I just want to be clear that I would prefer doing classic SE over hidden claim SE. But it was basically an experiment that I was testing out. Of course, we have that the pyramid where it kind of demonstrates the importance of the what, the why, and the how. Where the what is not as important as the why, and then the why isn't as important as the how. So the how is kind of supporting everything. And I was curious as to how little the what mattered, to the point where I wanted to experiment. Can I do a productive SE conversation without the what even being known to me? And so one of the things that I mentioned is, if depending on how you read the person, taking the top of the pyramid off can make the conversation less pointed. And so
was that deliberate?
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. But yeah, how little does the what matter?
So that's
and
just to be clear for anybody that's not familiar, that's what you believe, why you believe, and how
Right.
you believe, how you've gotten to that belief, right?
Yeah, and how did you figure out that the reasons that you're using are sufficient enough to support the amount of confidence that you have? And so I think that this could be helpful, with. Well, another thing that I say is that whenever you do hidden claim SE, you can leave your bloviation alarm in the car, because you're not going to need it. Because if they're trying to keep the claim hidden from you, it's less likely that they're going to go on and on and on and on and on and on about the part that's the least relevant, which is the what. So it helps you focus on the epistemology part. And so basically what you have them do is have them write down the claim that they want to explore. And the reason why I have them write it down is so that it can't fluctuate throughout the conversation. Of course, if they need to change their confidence in the claim, or if they want to change the claim, that's perfectly fine. But for the purpose of the experiment, it's fun to keep that constant. And then you just basically ask the same types of questions that you would in a normal SE conversation. How confident are you in X? What's the main reason? Why is this reason a good reason to believe stuff? What would raise your confidence in this? What would lower your confidence? Can we test this? Is there a way to tell if this claim was not true? And then, at the end, are you still at the same level of confidence? Have you moved up or down?
You're just setting up the
people
framework.
from being.
You're just setting up the framework for us to all be replaced by the machines. I mean, this is just all this is. It's just that eventually there's gonna be an Amazon bot that does it all for us. But it's a great idea.
And
sorry.
It lowers their defenses because they know that I don't know what the claim is.
Yeah.
So
bias is not an option.
It's possible that they could be safer exploring it with me because they're less worried about my view about it and how I'm going to react.
Yeah.
So it's a little bit scripted, and I'm okay with that. It kind of teaches them how to ask the right questions about whatever claim that they want to explore whenever they want to explore it. Nathan was telling me about a time when he was trying this in a hot tub full of people. And so what was cool about it is that everybody could explore their own claim in their head using the same questions. And so this could be something that you could use in a group, and everybody can think of their own claim.
Necessary in that is this? I missed that. Was the hot tub strictly necessary in that? I just wanted to understand how.
No, it was just a situation he found himself in. He was explaining SE, and then he decided to try the hidden claim with everybody participating. So
what is your confidence that those bubbles are coming from a nozzle? I can see it.
If I could ask, so I have not been exposed to this idea of hidden claim SE. I think it's really fascinating. My question is, does it seem to be as effective as we'll say traditional SE? Because my intuition here is that if you disagree with the claim, and your epistemology is more sound than the interlocutors, assuming that's the case, you're more likely to identify problematic thinking with their beliefs than if you were otherwise in agreement. And so it seems to me like it's more productive. And I don't know, I haven't tried this hidden claim SC. I'd imagine that it is really, it does have some efficacy, and it's probably, useful for that kind of situation. But I think it seems to me that being familiar with the argument in a more direct sense, you're able to pick apart potentially where bad thinking is going on. Do you think that the effectiveness matter, like your ability to be a good practitioner is somehow correlated to how much you agree or disagree with the claim? I guess that's my question.
Just my first reaction is no.
Okay.
I think what makes a good practitioner is the ability to remove your bias from the claim itself and focus on the epistemology, not on the claim. So, and like I said, I would prefer to do classic SE, but I have found myself in situations where a hidden claim would be more productive and maybe more what would be the right word, more efficient.
Yeah.
So I would argue that the bias I have towards the claim can cause you to have a less productive conversation, especially if your goal is having them reflect on the way that they arrived at the conclusion, not on the conclusion itself.
One thing
I understand what you're saying. What about the use of thought experiments? If you're doing hidden claim SE, then it doesn't become obvious what thought experiments are appropriate. So if you don't know that somebody is defending a claim that ultimately relies upon faith, then an effective tool like the outsider test becomes inaccessible to you. What do you think of that?
I would say that the claim in a lot of cases gets in the way of having a good thought experiment, because you're using the thought experiment to have them reflect on their epistemology, not not on the claim. So there is a video that you could check out on my channel that I had with my friend Missy. We did a hidden claim situation, but the first half of the video of the conversation is figuring out what her relationship is with truth. And I have the Tic Tac experiment, and a lot of other thought experiments happened also before we even got into the actual process of exploring the epistemologies. You got to figure out their relationship with truth. You got to figure that out first, because you're going to spend a lot of time possibly exploring things, and if you don't have a good grasp on their relationship with truth, you're probably going to be having a different conversation. You might be asking the wrong questions. So to answer you, I think that a lot of times the claim can get in the way of having beneficial thought experiments and an SE conversation itself.
Okay,
but
I'm definitely interested in seeing that video.
I am totally open to being mistaken about this. I'm still kind of researching it. I've gotten to the point where one of the main things, the difficulties about having a hidden claim experiment is their ability to articulate the main reason without revealing the claim. And so I've been playing with removing the main reason part and just exploring why they think that reason is a good reason to believe stuff, and using the main reason as like having that hidden also and keeping that from being in the way. It's weird, but I don't know, it seems to be working pretty well.
I think it's really at the heart of what SE is about. It's about the reasonings, right? And it's about if those methods are reliable or not. And yeah, you're right. You don't necessarily need to know what it is, just how they're coming to that conclusion. And that's that those methods. And I think that's like core to what the one comment was about the if good SE and the bad actor. The thing is, if you're doing good SE, there is no intentions. There's no biases. It's about whether or not their reasons are good enough for they believe to come to that conclusion. So if you are doing good SE, like it is taking away the bad actors, and if they're doing something bad with it, then you're not doing SE, because it's not about the truth. It's not about what you're coming to. It's about how you're coming to it. Yeah.
I think one thing that makes me think immediately about this is that it would be a great, if you were going to set up a training course for SE, as in fact that we're setting up a course that you can a study course, but like if we were doing a training sort of workshop session, I think it would be a great thing to do to initially get them to try to do SE with just the how questions, and then eventually you can say, okay, you've tried that, it's hard, right? You've not been very successful, it's not easy, possibly even not possible, but just trying to do that, I think, gets you some sense of what SE is about. And then you can have the why question, and then you can do a bit more SE with the why question. So now you can do how and why type things, and you can try to get to the heart of what the person believes. And then eventually, once you've sufficiently proven that you get the how and the why ideas, then you can have the what. I think that's a kind of great way to focus on the what is actually SE is really about. I think that's a great thought.
I think this has a lot bearing on the conversation partner, though, too.
Oh yeah.
Because the conversation partner has to understand what you're trying to even get at. I mean, we've all done SE and we've looked at it and we understand what the word epistemology is, but how much of the population does know that? I mean, a year ago I had no idea, and if you started asking me these why questions, I would have been pretty confused about it. So, if you have an interlocutor that is already hesitant towards exploring their reasonings, and wants to just keep on talking about whatever it is, I don't know that like even a hidden claim is going to be effective, because there's got to be that way of like reeling them back and like getting back down. It's like keep on focusing back to those questions.
Mm-hmm. I think it's a good training tool. Mm-hmm. I'm currently working on a hybrid idea of this, mm-hmm. and it goes exactly what you were talking about, Will, is starting with the how, and then at the end they can reveal the claim, and then we can go even deeper, and build that connection that we may not be able to have since the claim is hidden. Both of us knowing what the claim is, we can go into a deeper dive. But yes, what you're talking about right now, Sushi, I think that's why it's so important to have that informed consent. That way they know what they're getting into before this all starts.
So I did want to jump back a little bit, because I was going to address some point about the bad actor thing, and then we're so behind on questions, it's ridiculous. So firstly, I'm so sorry everybody in chat. There's been some great questions coming up, but I also, once we've got something to chew on, we're going to chew on it for a while. So I apologize if we're not.
It's a good problem,
but it's a good problem to have for sure. But I did want to mention, because I think that the bad actor concept certainly is worth thinking about. And one thing I found useful is thinking, and I was talking again, this is something that came up in my interview with Noah, which is on my YouTube channel, Inspire Reflection, like, comment, and subscribe. In that we talked about the notion of SE being sort of analogous linguistically to medicine, and you can the concept of medicine in principle doesn't necessarily, as in you can do all kinds of things that you think, you can do surgery on somebody, right? But what really matters is the intentions that you have when you're doing the surgery on somebody, because otherwise it's just stabbing with anesthetics. So the tools, the methods, the approach that are taken are not necessarily sufficient to say whether or not you actually do have good intentions. And I think it's quite important to recognize the fact that that within the community, it has to become an accepted paradigm. We have to culturally build in this idea, because it's the medical community that have built in the concept of the Hippocratic Oath, right? The do no harm is something that they've adopted in addition to the principles of applying medicine. It's not simply enough to say, give people drugs and see what happens. That has to be done under the rubric of the Hippocratic Oath. So I think within the SE community, I think it's really important for us to recognize that there is such a thing as good and bad executions of SE, and those executions of SE that are good are the ones that have honest and clear intentions, that build and maintain rapport, and that actually encourage honest, critical reflection of why a person believes what they believe without an agenda. If you're doing that, then you're doing top tier SE. That's good stuff, right? And to the extent that you're failing to do that is the extent that your attempt to do SE is increasingly worse. So the moment you notice that somebody, for example, has an agenda, is pushing a narrative, is asking pointed questions or leading you down a path, you can say, well, you might be thinking you're doing SE, but you're failing. just like subscribing medicine that is making people sicker. You think you're being a doctor, you think you're helping them, but I can show you how much this is harming people.
I actually have a good example of it, because this does happen quite often in the SE practice sessions over on the Discord server. And I had this person that really, really wanted to practice SE, but about anarchy, and they really kind of wanted to preach anarchy. So like as the host, I presented a claim of, like capitalism or whatever, or, democracy. And as they're asking me questions, I was like criticizing the questions and trying to guide them into doing SE at the same time. And what was interesting about it is it actually resulted in a really good SE session, because like I was almost self-SEing while teaching them to do SE. And you know what? They came out on the other side, like being a better practitioner. And, you know, it ended up going over, and then you could see that their questioning became better and less of an agenda. And I think there was a little bit of an epiphany on their side, realizing that, like, you know, you can't just, you know, assume what the other person wants to talk about. Yeah.
Yeah, and I definitely think, like, one of the things that the SE community is doing to help make sure that we have good SE and not bad SE is doing things like the practice sessions, doing things like the SE review videos, doing things like, you know, talking about it, like on this show, for example, creating examples of good content, but also being healthy critics of each other's stuff and saying, you know, that this isn't great, and, like, you know, those SE review video where SE YouTube videos are reviewed by a panel of people are just, I think, the perfect example of at least the intention and the honest and clear intention of the community to keep getting better at what it's trying to do. You put a video up on there and you ask a pointed question. I remember we were reviewing one of Mark Solomon's questions interviews, and about halfway through he just asked this totally lazy agendaed question. It's very not like him. He's very good at, and what was really funny was that everybody in the panel just burst out laughing the moment he asked it and then just teased him about it for about sort of 5 minutes because you know that's but to me that says, like, you're building the ear for it and you're willing to take the criticism. And he held his hands up. He's, yeah, that was but the thing is, if you get to that point, if you get to the point where you've noticed where you failed, I think you and the community and generally that the environment is good at helping you reflect on that and sort of respond to it. I think it's great. And I think the SE practice sessions are great places to start. I've definitely seen people come in with balled fists, swinging haymakers at their interlocutor, just trying, and then get really frustrated when they're told they're not allowed to do that, and they're like, "But why? What am I doing wrong?" But it's great to see people start off like that, and then, as you say, become slightly more calmer, become more clear with their questioning, genuinely start to reflect on how they might approach this conversation better. And I think it's just, yeah, I think better SE is the answer to bad SE for sure. And I think and building a community of supporting people that are willing to A, call out bad SE when we see it, and B, offer advice as to how to get better at it. I think that's probably all we have. So many questions. So John has asked several times now, would I like to most like to SE? Oh, and about what? Oh, he also asked me who. Sorry, there was a question about an hour ago, which was what would I like to be SE'd on, and who would you like to be SE'd? Who would you like to SE about what? Oh, I see. Okay, so it's 2 pointed questions. So what would you like? What claim would you like somebody to explore with you? And if you could pick anybody on the planet, who would you choose to SE?
This was a question on Twitter that I saw yesterday.
Oh, awesome.
I think it was yesterday, and my answer was yes.
I see.
Yeah.
Fair enough.
Yeah, not a very exciting answer, but I think I would agree with that. Is like, you know, anything that I believe I want to have SE'd. You know, a new claim that I kind of have recently formulated, or belief, is that our beliefs can be changed, contrary to what, you know, people believe, or you can choose your beliefs, and I think you can. I think you can. I mean, it's not like you can just like choose to believe that the moon is made of cheese, right? But I believe that you can do things that, you know. I mean, reasonings can be emotional, right? So, like, there's things that you can do to change your belief, right? You still have to be convinced of it, but doesn't mean that you can't necessarily believe. And you know what? I would really like to have, you know, more in-depth questioning around that. I mean, I always want. You know,
I'm laughing because literally that is the next question on the list of questions that we've been asked. Gigi has asked pretty much that exact question. So before we jump into that preemptive assault, Can I challenge David? Is there somebody famous that you would like, especially enjoy to do SE with? I appreciate your yes answer, but is there a particular character in history or in current culture that you think would be an interesting person to SE?
Yeah, any critic.
Yeah, fair enough. Yeah,
I would love any SE critic to practice SE with anyone, including me.
fair enough. Noah, do you have a less vague and hand-waving namby-pamby answer?
Yeah, I'll offer one. I'm for me, I think that the question of free will has so many implications to other beliefs, and I would like to be properly challenged on my current thought about free will, which is that it is an illusion. With respect to who, I suppose on one hand, there's a list of, super cool famous people that I think would be cool to do it with, but I think that ultimately it wouldn't be an emotionally supportive state for actually making progress, but maybe just for fun, like some really famous person, like a sitting president or something, so that it could be like a national spectacle where we have a honest, meaningful conversation on TV. I think that would be refreshing for some people, and it would get the word out a little bit about SE. And imagine if during debates, instead of what we get, we get proper epistemology discussions between candidates. Like that would be, that's like the dream world for politics, right?
Yeah.
When I first came to the Discord server, I was really hoping to be able to get SE'd by Anthony. He's the kind of the starter of this whole thing. It's like I didn't care what it was; I just wanted him to question me on it.
What's your confidence that would be a good thing?
70%.
Firstly, your free will answer, Noah, is brilliant, because I think that is I was really struggling to think of a specific claim that I would want to have explored by somebody really in a really interesting way. Like I think it's a hard claim. You and I are in the same place, as I suspect many people on the SE community might be on the subject of free will, but I think it's a challenging one. Like and it would be hard to SE, but I think if somebody could be very successful in SEing my claim, such that they could even reduce my confidence in it, I would be willing and keen to see why that might be and how that could be done. So I'm going to just steal your answer there. And as for somebody famous, I don't know. Some of my impulse is to say things like, Jordan Peterson, for example, might be amusing, if not massively frustrating. I doubt it would be productive, but it might be amusing. Sitting politicians for sure. I think that would be good. But I feel like they're just. They're not the sort of people you'd describe as doxastically open. I think it's to people. You would use other words to describe them, I would imagine. But yeah. But I think, so I'm not sure. I can't, one of the things that I enjoy really genuinely, and this is going to sound like a sort of hand-wavy answer of the sort that we get from David, really. But it's that I genuinely just like talking to anybody about this stuff. Like, I actually find strangers probably the most interesting to talk to. There's something exciting about not knowing the person you're standing opposite and having a conversation with, that kind of helps you reflect a little bit on who you are. And as well as who they are, and understand something about the nature of human relationships that I genuinely find fascinating. So I would probably prefer to talk to a total stranger than to Jordan Peterson. And I think it would probably make for a more interesting conversation, or would have a higher chance of a good conversation. The Dalai Lama or the Pope being suggested by John here. I don't know. The Pope would be interesting, but again, I don't know if doxastically open would be available to him. I'm not sure. Interesting. I would definitely like to hear more in chat for your suggestions of somebody you would like to street epistemologize, if we can make it a verb.
Maybe Jesus.
Maybe Jesus. Yeah. Yeah, I don't. Yeah, well, that would be interesting for lots of reasons.
As the IL or the practitioner.
Fair enough. Cool. So we've got about 10 minutes left on the clock here, guys. But it's a huge question, but I did say we would definitely get to it, which is to what extent do we think that we choose our beliefs? This is coming from Gigi, and I think it's a great question. It's a huge question to end on with 10 minutes left to go. So I apologize for that. I've definitely got my thoughts on this, but I would, and Sushi, I know you sort of expressed your views on this a little bit already, but like, do you want to kick us off with, how would you answer that? To what extent do you think we choose our beliefs? I think it's a great one to end on, actually. Now,
so like, I think there's the conflict of like when that question gets asked, like, do we choose our beliefs? Like, a lot of the beliefs I'm indoctrinated with as a kid, and after finding street epistemology, I would say that I'm deprogramming myself, right? I am choosing my beliefs. I am figuring out my reasons that I'm holding to them, and I'm changing them when necessary. But like that's still a process of like gaining the information necessary to convince you of the belief. So I don't think you can like just straight up choose to believe something, but you can choose to make changes in your life that can lead you to changing your belief. And I think it doesn't matter if the belief is necessarily true or not. I think you could still get yourself into a situation where you could change it. So I think you could totally believe something, end up believing something that you originally believe is not true, if you put yourself in the right circumstances.
Very good. I like it. David?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, because I don't think a lot of people think about that, whether they're able to choose their beliefs or not. I run into a lot of folks that, that it's their assumption that they can choose to believe whatever they want, right? And I'm not convinced of that, but I do like what you said, Sushi. We can take steps that will create a space for us to be able to have our mind changed, being open to having our mind changed. Mm-hmm. And I think that that's a really good goal to have, is, based on the information, I want to be able to have my mind changed if it's warranted. Mm-hmm. And I think, and I agree with you, I think that we can all take steps to get there. So that, I guess that's how I would answer that.
Yeah, that's cool, man. Any thoughts, Noah?
Well, I think from my perspective, the direct answer is no. There's not a sense in which you can choose your beliefs. And I think that should follow fairly obviously from the common reasonings against, the existence of free will. If you can't control your desires, then, and your desires control you, then, it follows then that you can't control your beliefs either. Right. Cause they're sort of in the same realm as the desires. And with what Sushi and David are saying, I think that it's like, that's like a noble sort of approach to try to expose yourself. But even with that, I'm not sure that even in that sense you can control your beliefs. I think that beliefs seem to be the product of things that are entirely outside of your control, ultimately. And so I suppose my answer right now is no, you can't control your beliefs in any meaningful way. I can't choose to believe something that I know to be untrue, not for any amount of time that's meaningful or any way that affects my behavior. If I could, I would. I mean, there are some beliefs that I would rather hold than what I currently believe, but I simply can't. Like, I would rather that free will exists. I would rather that God exists and that Jesus is the savior, because it would be so easy, right? There's so much. It just alleviates a lot of problems. But I can't just believe that. It's not something that's in my control. That's my answer.
No, that's good. So I think we have to step into the concept of the illusory existence of free will in order to really explore it from a human intuition's perspective in any case. But I would agree with your answer. Obviously, if there is no free will, there is no choosing any of it. But in the illusory space of this appearance of free will, you certainly don't choose, as Sushi was saying, you don't choose the information you're exposed to, right? You can't, you have information appears in your mind, and like you can't necessarily choose what that is. It seems to be coming from outside of yourself. You can't necessarily choose even how you respond to that rationally, right? You can't choose your response to that. So to that extent, you could say, I don't choose my beliefs. One thing that is worth noting, though, and I think is very pertinent to SE, is that despite the fact that you might not have new information to be exposed to, and that you'd already decided on your beliefs, you don't necessarily need other new information to change those beliefs, because what can happen is that you can actually just reflect on the information you have in a different way, and that will cause you to believe something differently. And I think that means that it's not a one-to-one correlation between information in and conclusive belief consequent to that. I think there is some processing that's done on that information, and I think that what street epistemology seeks to do is try to review and refine that processing such that you come to a more reliable, more consistent with the world conclusion from the information that you have. Street epistemology very specifically acts against or guards against injecting truths or delivering messages, which is in essence means don't give new information. We're really not in the business of giving you information, because that assumes that the information that we have is better. What we want to do is ask them to use their own information and reflect on it, to think differently about what they already understand. And by doing so, you can come to a new conclusion. And I think that that's very much the space that SE sits in. So yeah, that's really good. And what a beautiful place to end.
Well, I wanted to say one more thing about that, and it might be helpful to look at it as less of an on and off switch about beliefs, and more a dimmer switch, like how confident are you that the belief is true on a scale, rather than looking at it as binary. Now, I'm of the mind that, truth is binary. A conclusion is either true or not true, but you can look at how you approach it in more of a spectrum rather than binary, believe it or not.
So the problem with you're right, absolutely. I think that's absolutely true, that whenever somebody holds a belief, it's not a binary one, or you do or do not believe it. You just have a sufficient level of confidence to say that you believe it, and maybe you don't have enough confidence to say that you believe it. Two things to note there. One is everybody's evaluating that every time they need to. So they reevaluate the need in whenever it is that they're asked to do something in relationship to that belief. And so there's always an opportunity for them to have changed their mind and have had something sort of cause them to reflect differently on it. But the other thing is that whilst the beliefs themselves may be analog in that way, the degrees of confidence, choosing to act in the world is a binary condition. You either do or do not act in the world in accordance with the belief, regardless of whether or not that belief is at a varying degree of percentage. So there is this kind of weird state by which you have this sort of threshold of tolerance that you're sufficiently convinced by a particular position that you will act in the world in the positive, in the belief that it does exist. And therefore you will likely say, if asked, do you believe this? You just say yes. When actually maybe you're not even aware of the actual underlying level of confidence you might have, or the reasons for it. Maybe you've not reflected on it. And that stuff gets learned. Once you hear yourself say yes to something, you do believe it, you're slightly more likely to say yes again in the future, and these things can become quite habitual. And it takes something like SE, I think, to say, hey, pick one of those things you keep saying yes to or no to, and let's talk about how you got to that position. Awesome. John's just said he's got to bounce. Fantastic team, very much enjoyed it. Thank you, John. That's very kind of you. We are actually at an end ourselves right now. I'm really not. I've got no patter for ending this smoothly or gracefully. We have an outro, but I just want to say, guys, this has been awesome. I don't care if anybody who's been watching this and has enjoyed it. I've really enjoyed this. I genuinely feel like for me it's just an excuse to chat about SE for a whole bunch of time with a bunch of lovely people. So I've really enjoyed the show, and for the first one I couldn't have hoped for it going better. So thank you very much. I really appreciate it. Sushi, David, Noah, thank you so much. Any want to shout out YouTube channels or links to things or
come check us out on the Street Epistemology Discord server. There's the practice sessions on Saturdays. There's the EU friendly event and the AU friendly events, so European and then Australian friendly events. If you're in the United States, then it's just the afternoons and evenings.
Yeah, nice.
I would say to anybody that's interested in doing formal SE, on camera, that kind of thing, don't be scared. Just do it.
Just do it.
Be open. Just be open to criticism about it, and be open to adjusting based on that. But make it your own. Put your own artistic and creativity into it.
Get a drone.
And just do it. Just do it.
Shia LaBeouf couldn't have said it better. That's awesome. Noah, is anywhere people could follow you or like, comment, subscribe? Not just yet.
I am surprisingly, for considering I'm doing this, I'm pretty private about my internet presence, but I figure if there's anything with which I can, be open about on the internet, this ought to be it, right? Like this, having conversations about beliefs, that seems to me like, okay, I'll put myself out there, and but no, I don't have any platforms or anything that I'm gaining a following on or anything like that. So
that's awesome, man.
It's great to meet y'all too.
Yeah. And I would urge anybody, not just because it gives me views, but honestly, do go check out my interview between Noah and I. It was a great conversation. I really enjoyed it, and great way to find out more about Noah, and hopefully see him in the Discord community. So with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm going to punch the credits button, so we're going to roll the credits. But thanks, guys. It's been a great first stream. I've really enjoyed it, and thank you to everybody in chat who's just been fantastic. Snorty, I saw your topic suggestion. I will totally take that as a topic suggestion for next time. And in fact, I'm going to scour the chat later to uncover all of the questions that I missed, because I was a terrible host. So we need to figure some logistics stuff out here. But functionally, it's been a fantastic show. And so special thanks to everybody who asked questions today, especially those that asked more than one question. It's really helped the show go smoothly. So yeah, thank you so much, everybody. Have a great day. Stay safe, and we'll speak to you next time, next Friday, same time. Bye-bye.